Welcome to episode 2 of Imperium Orbis. In this series we will be taking a look at a scenario where the old empire wins World War III, and what happens in the world after. In the last episode we ended off with Rome joining the war. If you want a recap, be sure to watch the previous episode. So with Rome joining the war, they launch an offensive. They quickly move into Austria and liberate parts of the Farmers' Union. This completely destroys the Russian capabilities in the Farmers' Union, as they had already been struggling logistics-wise in the Farmers' Union, so Rome joining pushed it over the edge. The Farmers' Union is completely liberated soon after. This causes Norway and Finland to attack Russia while they are surprised. They launch a joint offensive. While Finland does not manage to take much land, Norway sees extreme success. They retake all of Jutland and invade Germany, speeding towards Berlin. Seeing this, Rome decides to launch an offensive up north to connect with Norway at Berlin. The two nations both arrive at Berlin, conducting a devastating encirclement. The Second Battle of Berlin takes place. Once again, we see a draw. However, Russia does eventually succeed in kicking them out of the city, however they remain close by. In Iberia, Galicia continues their advance, now not having to rely on Norwegian troops. They further invade Andalusia and liberate more land from Morocco. Moving back to Germany, the encirclement is complete, and 500,000 Russian troops are captured. This is devastating for Russia, as now the Army Group West is too weak to conduct any major offensives. Due to this, they attempt to play a defensive role. In Libya, the old empire continues to move across the North African coast. Eventually, they reach the Libyan capital and capture it. In the south, however, the old empire realizes that the tactics of the Ethiopian dictator will cause major threat. Due to this, they send multiple nuclear strikes to the front line. This kills the dictator and allows the old empire to advance. In Central Asia, the old empire captures the capital of Caspia and makes further advance into Central Asia. In the east, the Circle Alliance also advances into Russia, and they do not see much of a harsh defense, as Russia is now focused on defending their more valuable land. Meanwhile, the old empire sends more troops to Galicia. After months of fighting, Galicia manages to push Morocco and Andalusia fully out of Iberia. This finally manages to convince Carthage to join the war, after the old empire promises control of Gibraltar and some of Andalusia, as well as Libyan land. This comes to a surprise to Morocco, as over 1 million Carthaginian and Imperium troops cross the border, and Galicia makes a landing over the Gibraltar Gap. Meanwhile, Libya surrenders and Ethiopia is now seeing fighting on their own soil. Shortly after, they surrender. It is at this point, however, where the old empire decides to launch a second offensive into Russia, as they see Russia's weakened state. Norway breaks through the lines in Germany, and the Farmers' Union and the old empire launch a consolidated front into Russia. Due to the sheer vastness of the battlefield, Russia is pushed back. At this point their troops are too spread out and their reserves are low, totaling at roughly 3.5 million, compared to 7 million on their border. In Finland, they launch a new attack in Russia. They take the land around the Gulf of Finland and join up with Norway, who made a landing in Latvia. In the east of Russia, China and their allies easily take a massive amount of Russian land, however it is not very valuable or defended. In Africa, Ghana leaves the war due to a lack of faith, and Morocco shortly after, due to them losing their capital. Meanwhile, in Russia, the front lines completely collapse, and eventually the capital of Russia is captured by the old empire. After some more fighting, where the Russian armies put up little resistance, Russia surrenders, and Russia is divided into two occupation zones. The old empire has won the war. However, the old empire is not done just yet. In our timeline, Vietnam and Korea formed a joint coalition against China. This ended up being successful. But if it were to happen here, China would crush them due to the main fighting being over. However, here, the two nations decide to coordinate with the old empire. And just 2 weeks after the Russian surrender, the Babylon Pact declares war on the Yangju Alliance, along with Korea and Vietnam. This shocks China. With 10 million troops against 6 million for China, the fighting begins. The old empire quickly invades into Afghanistan and Tibet. Vietnam storms through South China, and Korea invades North China. In America, Mexico decides to not join the war, as they see the overall situation, where the Circle Alliance is bound to lose. This is accepted by Carolina, who signs a non-aggression pact. Back to East Asia, the old empire continues to advance, as well as Vietnam, but Korea is pushed back. Due to this, China decides to launch a nuclear attack along the whole front line to slow the old empire down. This goes well, and the offensive is paused. However, the old empire responds with a nuclear attack on the major cities of China. This sways the population heavily against the war. Due to this, China surrenders. The old empire has now won the war, and has achieved global hegemony, as they have eliminated all other strong powers, their main reason for invading China. Now, let's take a look at this peace treaty. This is an extremely large peace treaty, so I apologize if I miss anything. As we can see, the old empire now has dominance over the world. Let's begin in America. Carolina takes a lot of Texan land, much more than our timeline. The terrorist organization also gains land. Carolina obtains the creation of 2 new states from Texas, one being a puppet state that allows them to gain access to the Pacific, and the other being a buffer state between Mexico and Carolina. This new country, however, is very weak and pro-Mexican, as they believe Mexican unification would save their struggling economy. Now, let's move on to Africa. First off, we see that Morocco is heavily weakened. They lose a lot of important land, and Senegal gains independence. We see that Carthage gains all promised land, and they puppet Andalusia. Over to the east, we see that the old empire gains the rest of Libya, as well as some Ethiopian lands. They also replace the government into a democratic one. We can also see that they spread their influence by adding more North African nations into their economical alliance. Now, over to Europe, we see lots of changes. Galicia gains a lot of land in the south, mostly from Andalusia. We see that Rome gains Austria, and Norway gains Germany. Norway also gains Russian Sweden. Hungary gains the former Dutch land, despite being neutral. Up north, we see that Finland gains land that they had previously lost and some. In the south, the Farmers' Union gains some land, but now, we move on to the elephant of the room, the old empire. The old empire gains an extremely large piece of land in southern Russia. They also puppet a state of the former Russian capital. The last thing to mention is the fact that Russia has been completely split up into smaller states. In order to keep these weak, the old empire set these nations up very badly, causing the governments to be very anarchist. The only exception to this are the nations that joined the old empire's economical alliance, as well as Estonia and St. Petersburg, who are put under Finnish influence. Finally, we move on to Asia, where we see the rest of the divided Russian states. The old empire creates a puppet state from Kyrgyzstan. Tibet loses some land and Afghanistan is annexed. Moving east, we see Siberia regains lost land from Russia and China. Speaking of China, they come out of this war extremely unstable. While the original government is still in control, the civilian government that took control in our timeline is still organizing power. We see that Korea gains less land, as when China surrendered they did not have any direct occupation in China. Finally, we move on south. Here we see Vietnam takes less land. This is because they realize that this would make them very unstable. Instead, they take the coastal land, and create a puppet state. The remaining land becomes a new state, aligned to Vietnam. And that is the full overview of the peace treaty. We see that the old empire has won the war and established a new order. The final event of this video is the old empire changing their name to Imperium Orbis, Latin for the Empire of the World. Thanks for watching this video. I have a lot planned for this series, so I hope you will enjoy the following episodes. If you enjoyed, like and subscribe.